Well guys, it finally happened. I finally was able to will myself to complete a real Megami Tensei game. None of that casual Persona garbage, am I right? Haha. Yeah, memes aside, my previous video on Megami Tensei was talking about how I've kind of struggled to get invested into the few mainline Shin Megami Tensei games that I've played, or tried to play, being SMT4, Nocturne, and Strange Journey Redux. You can go watch that video, once you're done with this one of course, to hear my experience with those three games. But today I'm here to talk about a Megami Tensei game that technically is not mainline. Here in the West, it's known as Shin Megami Tensei Digital Devil Saga, but in Japan, it's actually known under a slightly different moniker, being Digital Devil Saga Avatar Tuner. So while this game does fall under the greater Mega 10 umbrella, it's technically its own spin-off series within the franchise as a whole. Although there are a number of similarities, but also a number of differences that set it apart from mainline SMT. So what I kind of wanted to go through in this video is those similarities and differences that are present in Digital Devil Saga that make it stand out for me as being not only my favorite non-Persona Megami Tensei game that I've played thus far, but also probably one of my favorite games of all time. Now I should note before I get started that Digital Devil Saga is technically part of a duology, and it seems like it was developed as such, to the point where at the end of the first game there's actually a teaser from the very beginning of the second game. So I think very intentionally designing a game's narrative around there being two entries from the get-go is kind of a big deal because it prevents continuity errors and it allows for things to be established in the first game very intentionally with the intent of having the payoff be in the sequel. Whereas if you make a sequel or even a prequel to a game without initially planning it, it can end up causing a lot more problems, particularly from a storytelling front, than this approach. So the main major aspect that Digital Devil Saga retains from mainline SMT, which I somehow failed to bring up in my mainline SMT video, is the press turn battle system. Now this battle system was far and away my favorite aspect of mainline SMT. This is basically how it works. Each participant in a given battle allots you one turn icon. So in Digital Devil Saga, each of your three participating party members would each get one action until you dig a little bit deeper. Since there are ways for you to essentially double the amount of actions you have per turn, because the participants on the enemy side of the field also get one turn icon per participant. So if you get ambushed by 5 different demons at once, they're going to have the upper hand as far as number of actions they can take once your turn is over. So you have to be very careful and strategic when it comes to trying to flee from random battles and whatnot. But the way to manipulate these turn icons to your benefit is by either hitting a weakness or landing a critical hit. Now landing a weakness is something that is totally in your control, whereas a crit is always a random chance, although there are ways to increase your critical hit chance. And even some ways to guarantee one, like if an enemy is frozen or stunned. And what this will do to the icons in the top right corner is cause them to flash, indicating that you have one more action before you eat up that turn icon, giving you 6 actions per turn at most. Now the opposite side of the coin to this is there are also ways for you to lose extra turn icons. So if you either miss an attack, or if you land an attack that an enemy either voids, repels, or absorbs, you lose turn icons. Now, there are ways that you can kind of leverage this by landing a weakness or a crit a couple times, and then if you do happen to use an attack either by mistake or you're scouting for weaknesses or whatever, then it will eat up those blinking turn icons as opposed to taking your fully unutilized ones, if that makes sense. So this leads to a lot of depth of strategy just in the combat system itself and the way that turns play out. Contrary to mainline SMT, as opposed to negotiating with demons to recruit them and then going on to fuse them to make different party members, your party members are pretty set in stone, at least as far as the members themselves, where, you know, certain story moments and decisions will influence who is available in your party at any given time. And I would highly recommend not ignoring your extra party members. Don't invest all of your time and money into just 3 characters, because there can and will be times where you're going to want that versatility, since you can swap party members out in the middle of battle. Now the major difference when it comes to party customization compared to the demon negotiation and fusion system is you have the mantra grid, which is less of a grid and more of a set of paths in the first Digital Devil Saga. It kind of reminds me vaguely of the job system from Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, as well as some of the other Final Fantasy systems like the Esper system, where you basically have a secondary experience gauge that you fill up in a different way to acquire new skills. You gain this experience towards mantras by acquiring Atma points, which you do accrue some of just by completing battles themselves, but you can greatly increase the amount of Atma points you receive at the end of the battle by devouring enemies, which is by using certain skills that have the hunt attribute attached to them. And the best strategy that I found for grinding mantras, which I did find myself doing several times throughout the game, probably more so than actually level grinding, was I unlocked the AP divide ability with Surf, the main character, as well as a strong hunt skill, and basically went around hitting weaknesses to trigger the status effect on enemies that makes them more vulnerable to hunt skills, and then simply using the hunt skills on those enemies. I'd also recommend the Iron Stomach skill as well to prevent stomach aches from devouring too many enemies in too short a period of time, but I got by pretty okay by just having one of my party members have those skills, equipping them for grinding mantras, and then unequipping those skills when I was doing real battles. And so this mantra system allows for a great amount of party customization and flexibility, since technically any party member can learn any skill on the mantra grid, with the main differences between them being what elements they're strong or weak to, at least until you're able to unlock the resist skills, which you can eventually get. But it allowed for the same level of strategy that I know is present in mainline SMT, but without the tedium of having to grind out and fuse a team of demons to take down a boss. I could just simply unlock more mantras, set the skills that I want to try against a particular boss, and just do it. The downtime between attempts was significantly less than in my experience with Strange Journey, for instance. And the game overall took me around 26.5 hours to beat. My party members were all in the high 40s, just for the record. And so compared to something like a mainline game, which seems to take 40 plus hours to beat, this is a lot more manageable. And while there is a part 2, which I would imagine is going to take around the same amount of time, maybe a little more, it feels a little bit more digestible, pardon the pun. But something that I failed to mention thus far is that I found Digital Devil Saga, as well as its sequel, which I'm currently making my way through as of recording this, to have a far more compelling plot setup and more interesting characters as well. The first game's plot has a lot of mystery behind it, and a lot of those mysteries aren't solved by the end of the first game. In fact, you probably end the first game with more questions than answers, but it's more about establishing the characters themselves and kind of setting up these big mysteries for the payoff in the second game. And let me tell you that when you boot up that second game and you watch that fucking opening, tell me you don't have goosebumps. Just, you can't tell me that. It's such an incredible payoff. Even from the very first opening cutscene, you're like, what the fuck is going on? And for me, like, I just wanted to know more, and I just am so captivated by the story in these games. It's honestly one of the most creative plots I've seen in JRPGs, and while the breadth of JRPGs that I've played isn't huge compared to, I'm sure, some people who have been invested in the genre since, childhood, I feel like I've touched a lot of the major bases in JRPGs at least, and so I feel like it's high praise to say that about this game's story. Now, unfortunately, this game has not received a modern port or remaster, and this is actually one of the rare instances where I actually don't want really anything changed. The only negative I can possibly think of for these games is that it is random encounters and not enemies on the overworld, but that's something that I can kind of get over because of how excellent I feel like the rest of the gameplay and the story is, though I do have a fairly low tolerance for random encounters these days. And the encounter rate in these games is on the high side, but I didn't have too much trouble escaping battles that I did not want to participate in. And the music in these games is so fucking phenomenal that it didn't really bother me that I was getting into battles constantly. But yeah, assuming these games do get a remaster treatment, I'd highly recommend anyone who has not played these games and is even vaguely interested in anything that I've mentioned, go and pick this up when the inevitable Digital Devil Saga duology remaster comes out, because I'm sure it'll happen. It's just a matter of when. Atlas is not exactly a predictable company in that way. If it were to happen, it's definitely going to be after the Persona games get ported to other consoles, because that is definitely their focus at the moment as far as marketing is concerned. But yeah, highly recommend you play these games any way you can, and then if they are available to you in some official capacity where your money will go towards the developers, I would highly recommend picking up a copy as well. Because even though I'm emulating these games, and this is my stance kind of in general with emulation, where I much prefer to emulate most games since my PC is like my main gaming platform of choice, and that way I don't have to have a million other systems hooked up. But if a game that I've emulated and played and enjoyed does come out to an official capacity, I always make an effort to go out and buy an official copy of the game. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on Digital Devil Saga. Let me know in the comments if you've played these games, what you think of them. I feel like most people who have played these games think they're incredible, which I would definitely agree. And then for those who haven't played it, let me know if I've done any convincing to get you to try to check it out. I would highly, highly recommend that you try to avoid spoilers as much as possible. Although even then, I caught glimpses of like the second game's opening cinematic, for instance, but I had no fucking clue what was going on at the time. That now that I have context behind that, I'm like, oh shit, this shit is gonna get real. But yeah, as always, leave a like and subscribe, of course, if you enjoyed, and I hope to catch you guys in the next video.